I'll say, good morning to folks first. Excited to be here today, and we've got a lot of conversation ahead of us, and so I just want to get us going to keep us on track. But Stephanie, I know that we'll be a little short on roll call, and then Alexis, if you could just continue to track who enters, and I'll make you a co-host so that you can kind of see on the back end. Or if actually, Jordan, if you could do that for me, that'd be great. I don't have that function. So Stephanie, I'll hand it over to you, and we'll go from there. Thanks.
Great. Good morning, all. Great to see you again. Happy May. Spring is sprung. I hope you're all getting some sunshine. I'm going to do a quick roll call, and if you'll just go ahead and just let me know that you're here, that would be great. And if everybody could go on mute, I'm getting some pretty bad feedback, and yeah, that helped it. Thank you. All right, I'm just starting at the top of our list. Norma. I did not see Norma. We'll move on. Ashley Chase. Not seeing Ashley. Brian Cotter. Hello, Brian's here. Janelle. Janelle, are you here?
Janelle wasn't going to be here. I saw an email from her come through, I think.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Chelsea. Not seeing Chelsea right now. I know Dave Lee is gone today. Renee, I believe I saw you.
Yep, I'm here, and I'll be on camera in just a moment.
No worries. Good morning.
Morning.
Brandon.
I'm here.
Good morning, Brandon.
Good morning.
Elizabeth is here. Good morning. Kelly Abbott.
I'm here, just off camera.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Michelle Bradley. Not seeing her. Anna Cole. Okay, Dennis. Not seeing Dennis. Dave Hayes. Not seeing Dave. Kevin Lash, we already said good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome. Chase Leonard. Not seeing Chase. Beth McNally.
Morning.
Good morning. I see you. Becky.
Good morning.
Hi, Becky. And Lynette. Not seeing Lynette. Okay. Alexis, what does that have us at just as a vote right now?
That has us at I have us currently at 11, maybe 12. Let me double check.
That's okay. Just checking in. And did I miss somebody? It feels like my list is incomplete. Yeah, Jana, I thought so. Thank you, my friend. Yes, Jana's here. Sorry, I had 2 pages, and I think I dropped one somewhere along the way at 5 a.m. Okay, I think we are done with roll call, my friends. I'm going to go ahead and move into approval of the meeting minutes. Just a quick show of hands. Everybody got into the Google Drive. You found all your meeting documents. Show of hands, head nods. Yes, great. Okay. Terrific. We have 2 meeting minutes that we need to approve. I am going to go first to March 1, 2023. Are there any edits or additions, deletions, or corrections to the meeting minutes of March 1? I'm flipping through my screen. I see none. Fantastic. If I could have somebody make a motion to pass those meeting minutes and a second, please.
So moved.
Okay, that was Kevin, and a second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Jana. And I'll just make it easy. Is there anybody who opposes the passage of these meeting minutes? Seeing no hands raised, those meeting minutes will pass. Moving on to April 12th of 2023. Same question. Any additions, deletions, or corrections? I see no hands, no concerns. Okay. If somebody could please make a motion and just state who you are when you do, and then also if I could have a second.
Elizabeth, so moved.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Second?
Brandon, second it.
Thank you, Brandon. All right. Is there anybody who is opposed to the passage of these meeting minutes? Raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, those meeting minutes will pass as well. All right, I think that's my bit. Trace?
That's your bit. Thanks, Stephanie.
Okay.
And good morning, everyone. We'll again, I've seen a couple folks come in just since we've taken roll, so welcome to you all as well, and we'll make sure to record that in the minutes. So a couple of things here. I know that we'll kind of go with the keeping of some housekeeping items, and then we'll get into the discussion today. So I know that we introduced Doris at our last call, but everyone was not present. And so I'm honestly not quite sure who wasn't present. So I just wanted to ensure that we had one more pass at making sure that we gave Doris a little bit of airtime to talk about who she is and her excitement. I know that she's excited to be here. I've worked with Doris on our other task force with CPO, which is the Mandatory Reporting Task Force. And we just quickly realized that we would really appreciate her content knowledge, her expertise in facilitation, and just her partnership in this work. And so we brought her over to support this task force moving forward. So she'll be with us this entire process as well, and is kind of working with me in tandem to handle the facilitation piece. So Doris, I'm going to give a quick stab at some of your experience, which is quite the roll call of what brings you here today. And please add any context, and then I'll give it a minute for you to say good morning as well. So Doris is also with a similar firm to Keystone Health Management Associates. And Doris, you're based, and I always get it wrong, based in Indianapolis, right? Okay, based in Indianapolis. Doris is really an expert in the child welfare space with decades of experience in the Indiana Department of Child Services in a variety of roles. Also worked with the Annie E. Casey Foundation, also with Foster America, which I didn't realize, Doris, I love Foster America. So that's cool to see the connection there. And so just brings a wealth of knowledge around this particular space, and also has that unique lens, both with her professional experience, but also her experience as a facilitator. So really appreciate that piece there. And then Doris, would just love for you to jump in on any other pieces that you feel are relevant to the task force.
So yeah, I hate introductions because it's like it feels like a little bit like, oh, I'm just like chatting like really great. So I just want to say it's a pleasure to join with this task force. Moving the needle, having some rich conversation. I was able to participate in the interim meeting last month, which was I think just really rich conversation. I have a passion for outcomes for kids and families, and so just happy to contribute whatever I can to the conversation, but more importantly, just to help facilitate getting this the task force members voice, bringing some rich conversation around keeping kids and youth safe when they are in placement facilities.
Thanks, Doris.
That's all I got.
That's all you got. Yeah, intros are weird. I'm like, should I go down your degrees and all that?
Yeah, no.
I love people that are uncomfortable with introductions. So appreciate you humoring me. But we're super lucky to have you, and I'm really honored to partner with you in this. So thanks for being here. All right, moving on. We mentioned this in the last meeting as well, but just want to reemphasize. You'll see this in your emails. We've moved things over to Google Drive. I think it's just going to be easier for us as a task force to access documents, to offer comments, et cetera, as we have working documents, particularly as this work goes deeper. And it's just a little bit easier of a function than Dropbox. And that was a direct feedback we received from you all in our exit surveys. So just appreciate your input there. And as we continue that kind of move over, if you have any feedback, please continue to give it to us. And we appreciate y'all's push on that. And the last piece is we're going to have a document in the Google Drive, which is called a shared media folder. I know that there's a lot of moving parts, particularly as we work on a 2-year project. So folks might email us, interesting articles, resources, media write-ups about this task force itself. So this will just be a running log where you all can reference those things that have been shared out, so they're not just kind of floating out in the ethos. So that's just an effort to put it in one spot. So if you do share something with us to say, hey, this would be an interesting thing to look into, that's where we would be sharing those pieces. Any questions there before we move on? Cool. All right, moving on to the next slide, Jordan. I'm going to drop in a link now. This can also be found in the Google Drive. So every good task force has guardrails, right? And we're doing this a little backwards. We kind of got off to a running start. We had some shifts in our facilitation team. And this is really just meant, this is we do this with every task force Keystone works with. I think Doris, you do this as well with your task forces. It's really just something to ground us in things that are already agreed upon within the group, but also to just be explicit around the mission, around the charge of this group, the outcomes. Again, you'll see those outlined in the directives as well. It's a little bit more straightforward with this group because of the legislative directives. We also have some ground rules in there that we can call back to. Those are suggested ground rules, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on it today. I want you to, we sent this out in email, but if you have a chance to look at it, please write back in our survey if you think we're missing something or you think we're off on something. This is really a continued working doc, but I think that it's neutral enough, and that we're just calling folks to a place of listening, of collaboration, of integrity, of recognizing that we all bring different perspectives and experiences to the table, and honoring those voices, and just naming that if we need to go back to that. But we're all adults here, and I think we've got a fantastic group together. So we just wanted to put that in writing. And the last piece is really around the media protocols, which is just a best practice of, as we continue this work and folks, might reach out to you as a task force member, how we would love to see it, to just ensure that we have an understanding of, who's wanting to talk about the work of the task force, and we want to support you in that. We don't want to gatekeep in your ability to talk about your experience as a task force member, but we also just want to make sure that we are aware of articles that might be running, or press releases that folks might be putting out, and so just that we have an understanding of that and that we can work with you as a partner. So I'm going to drop the link here if anybody wants to check that out. And again, it's in the Google Drive, and we welcome feedback as we go along. That was also emailed. So any questions there, or concerns, or anything to pull out real quick before we move on? Everyone's so quiet this morning. So can I just get like yeah, we're here. Good morning. Okay, cool. All right. I'm just covering it all so well that nobody has questions. Wow, Doris, can you believe this? I love it. All right.
They're just getting warmed up.
They're just getting warmed up. It's 8:18, y'all. I'm going to give you to 8:20, and then folks are coming off mute and we're going crazy. All right, moving on to the next item, Jordan, if you will. So this next piece is just want to reference a kind of a new strategy around recapping meetings in a way that feels meaningful for folks, doesn't require you to read pages and pages of transcribed minutes that Alexis so lovingly put together for our group. But if you want to see kind of where we've been, how we've captured particularly the conversation itself, and if you have feedback for us, you can see that in the recap. And the recaps will really be driving how the report is drafted and written along the way. And so it's really an accuracy piece, right? This is based directly on exactly what we see and what we hear in the task force meetings, and it's just more of a narrative. And so I do just want to just call out that those are shared with you via email. It's similar to minutes, but again, the goal is that you're reading something more that's more of a summary and less of a transcription, and you'll see then also how we're shaping that up into the report as we go. Doris or Stephanie, any other context for the recap that you want to add there, or any questions from the task force?
The only thing I would add, Trace, is that if task force members read this and go, hey, that's not how I recall it, or you have any sort of suggestions, comments, or even edits, please feel free to reach out, because as Trace already mentioned, this really will be the backbone for the report. It is a way for our staff to be able to be writing this report as we go. as opposed to staying up every night for a month before it is due. And so that was part of the reason behind these summaries. But want to also just acknowledge, we're all humans. We hear things differently. We interpret and analyze differently. And so again, I would ask you to take a look at these before each meeting and reach out to us if you have any other thoughts, concerns, questions.
Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, this is we are, if you can believe it, we're humans behind this effort of capturing this incredibly complex and charged and important and critical conversations. And so it is quite the task to ensure that we include all the layers of those conversations, and we really count on you all to hold us accountable in doing that in the way that you see fit. So just appreciate, Stephanie, you kind of underlining that, and again, appreciate folks digging in with us on this and ensuring that we're getting it right. All right, moving on to the next piece, unless somebody wants to jump in. Okay. So we're making a better effort as we drive towards this this goal of getting through all of these directives. Appreciated the push from a variety of task force members and Stephanie as the chair to ensure that we're capturing that in a way that is visual and that you all can see, and you can see where we've been and where we're headed. Kevin, I'll say that you have been a really helpful thought partner in making sure that we are clear on how each of these pieces fit into where we are. And I know folks are eager to get to certain parts of the discussion, and I share in that eagerness with you, and also wanting to make sure that we do each of these directives with fidelity, because that is what we're required to do as a task force. So we thought this might be an easy way to see kind of what we're in right now, and also where we're going. And I'll go into these a little deeper as far as what we've done so far. But right now, I just want you to this is the slide we'll keep coming back to that'll have different iterations as we go. Right now, you'll see that we have the total 8 directives. You'll see that from the purposes of, again, the report, we have completed one conversation, which is around the sufficiency of statewide quantitative data. All right. And so we're seeing that as a check mark that we are moving on from that conversation and moving to these other directives. We are currently in the process of analyzing the sufficiency of statewide qualitative data. And the next piece I want to name, this is something that lives and breathes. There is no check mark for this next directive, because it is something that we will continue to come back to and reference, which is analyzing the root cause of why children and youth run from care. There is no quick and easy way to summarize that, as you all know, and as we've discussed leading up to this point. So this will be a directive that we come back to again and again. We have chewed off a piece of that when we had the conversation with Domo and Nate when we started this task force. We've heard from providers and those in their experiences. We've heard from law enforcement and their experiences. We're hearing from a variety of perspectives, and we'll continue to. So that directive is not neat and tidy, and we know that. And so we just want to name that that's always an ongoing one, if that makes sense. And then, sorry, just go back up one more time, Jordan, real quick. And then the rest of the directives are named here. And as we move into them, we want to just be clear of where we are in the process. And so we'll bring this slide up and be clear about which directive we're in each meeting. Any questions on how we're kind of parsing this out? And Kevin, I'm looking at you because I know that you're someone that says, okay, let's get to this next piece. Does this kind of lay it out?
This is helpful. It's sometimes hard to keep track of exactly where you're at in kind of this muck. So a little bit of a roadmap, I think, would be helpful to everybody.
Cool. I appreciate that. And I love the word roadmap, because we actually have even a more in-depth roadmap that Doris is going to go over here in a bit around how we're going to get to these next directives. So I'm excited to bring in that conversation. So appreciate that feedback, Kevin. Anybody else with questions or comments? Is this helpful to see? Seeing some head nods. Cool. Okay. All right. Moving on. So just with the checkbox of the sufficiency of quantitative data, just want to make sure that you all are understanding kind of how we're seeing that checkbox of what that actually entails, of what the work that you all have done. So again, the directive analyzes the sufficiency of quantitative data, statewide data that measures the quantitative and qualitative experiences of children and youth who have run away from care. we're checking just the quantitative side, and then we're going to continue the qualitative side here today. The quick captures there are that no, the majority of members do not find the current quantitative statewide data to be sufficient. There is a need for standard data entry and consistent extraction methods. Data should be able to consider the why behind when children and youth run from care. And data currently does not capture attempted or available interventions. The deeper piece of that and how you'll see that reflected in the report, again, will be in the meeting recap, but these are the high level points that we wanted to just pull out. Any questions here around how we captured this? All right, it's the Trace show this morning. I'm just talking. Okay. All right, moving on. Again, ongoing on the qualitative data that measures the quantitative and qualitative experience of children and youth who have run away from care. A couple of things I want to clarify. So we've got this focus group report presentation, and that is a product of this task force, right? And so we're going to be talking, and Doris will talk about that, and I'll kind of reiterate that in a little bit when we answer the poll around, is qualitative data sufficient? This qualitative data of the report is not something that was previously available to this task force or previously available to the public. It is a product of this task force. So we're pulling that out from if that is helping with the sufficiency of qualitative data. It is not qualitative data that would typically be available. It is an example of what qualitative data could be, and we want to hear you all's responses to that once we go through the report. And then the member discussion and analysis will kind of get us to being able to answer this with fidelity. So I think that's the piece Renee, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, actually, so I was gonna try to say something on the prior slide. I'm on a new device and I couldn't quite
No,
find
you're
my
good. I saw you,
virtual
so that's why
hand.
I just cut myself off. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, just the whenever we talk about the why, I get a little bit caught up, and I think it might be helpful to, whether it's in places like this or other places, also think about it as precipitants, because or the antecedents or something like that, because the why sort of implies something different than here's maybe what happened before. It might not be the whole explanation, but does that make sense? And and that's also often how things are worked on with kids to change behavior, is thinking of the stepwise, what was the antecedent thing that happened, and then what you do next. You get at something slightly different than sort of asking why, where you're asking someone for an explanation, rather than, well, this happened and then I did this, and I don't really know why, but here was the chain of events.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Renee, and Doris, I'm seeing your head nod, so I'll bring you in to respond to that real quick before I give my response.
Yeah, I definitely think that the shorthand for why is incomplete, because I think the goal is to really understand what are the surrounding circumstances, and not just like, why did the child or youth make that choice or initiate that act. And so I think that that's a really good push in sort of thinking about the complexity of the surrounding circumstances. I think, antecedent, and also the, kind of the other factors that might have gone into the child or youth running away from care. So I think that that's really important. Language is important, and being precise in what we're talking about. I think what you surfaced, Renee, is a good reminder of that.
Can I just interrupt for a second? It's Stephanie. Renee, can you say just a little bit more with an example for me? When you talk about antecedent conditions, I mean, I know what the word means, but yeah, from a clinical perspective.
Yeah, I think sometimes people try to get an answer to something like this or anything else by asking the person, why did you do this? And, the person may not fully understand. Our brains are complex, and especially if someone's overwhelmed by emotions, they may not understand. They may say, well, I was mad at the staff and they did this. But, if someone had a fuller picture, they might see well, an hour before they had gotten off the phone with somebody and they were, feeling kind of bad. And then they had an interaction with a peer that triggered them about, past something or other. And maybe the thing in the moment was they had an argument with the staff, and in their mind, well, I left because I was mad, but that wouldn't necessarily really tell the real picture.
That's super helpful. And so I have a couple questions for you. One is, when we talk about the directive regarding root causes, right? I think that could be a place where we could explain more deeply what you've explained today. But I'm also just wondering, is there a place to put that fuller thought, if you will, or preview that thought as we marked complete here? I just, again, trying to be accurate. Should we broaden even this slide? Because again, this slide will impact the report, from putting the word why to giving this fuller explanation. In other words, that quantitative data should not only explain why, but these other conditions that are attendant to a circumstance. I just want to make sure we're capturing everyone's voice as we go along for accuracy.
Yeah, or even, I mean, use the term root causes. I mean, it could be underlying, causes or contributors or something. Might be a broader term that could capture it.
Fantastic. All right, we'll make a note of that. Thank you.
Renee, I appreciate that. I think, again, kind of in the
being recorded.
I think the theme is the complexity, right, of how we're capturing these things. So I appreciate when folks come in and jump in and point out that maybe we're not, our language isn't giving a nod to that complexity there. So I think that's a really great call out. So I appreciate that. Anything else from anybody before we move on? Sorry. All right. Jordan, if you want to move then just to the last, so we went to the next one, the ongoing, and then to the following one. So really, so again, we're sitting continually on one of those ongoing directives, and more specifically in the qualitative data directive today. But Doris is going to kind of, as we zoom out and think about all these directives, we also, to Kevin's point, are going one step deeper onto a roadmap itself of how we see when is being discussed at what meeting. We also want to recognize we have those that, conversations might go deeper than we anticipated, or we might want to, stick on something a little longer. And also our job as facilitators is to ensure that we have adequate time to talk about all the things that we are in charge of. So we did give a quick stab at a roadmap. Doris, I'm going to hand it to you to give the context and walk it through, and then we'll go from there.
Awesome. Fantastic. So I think I see the roadmap really as a complement to the tracking of the actual each of the charges, the directives of the task force. This is kind of the how we will get to fulfilling the requirements of the task force itself, all of the directives. And so we tried to think about each of the directive questions in terms of the kind of information and topics and sequencing of topics in a way that flowed well, that made sense, and that could ultimately help us get to what I know many, if not all of you, really care about is how we put forth some ideas around preventing young people from running from care. So in our June meeting, we wanted to really, I think, language, as I mentioned before, as Renee lifted up for us in the conversation about why versus root causes, is the language is really important. And so in June, we will talk about what really constitutes running from care, because we know that kids and youth who egress from and out of home placement, depending on the circumstances of that youth, depending on their age, depending on their relative level of competency and capacity, brain development, the surrounding issues of that child or youth, leaving that placement. All of those things factor into how we are thinking about what constitutes running away, as well as what constitutes running from care, as well as ultimately how you then prevent those particular circumstances. So we have 2 meetings devoted to this particular conversation, because we know that we anticipate that it will be a considerable one. And then we want to have some time really to talk about the kind of bringing together all of the conversations to date in our August meeting, and have some reflection and discussion that will influence the interim report development, refinement, and then ultimately finalization for September. So these conversations we think will lead to a comprehensive interim report that reflects the complexity of the conversations to date, and also that really honors the different voices and perspectives that we have in the task force in a meaningful way. And we wanted to make sure that we have opportunities for there to be some iteration of the interim report. So Stephanie mentioned earlier that we don't want to end up with like this month long of all-nighters in drafting reports. So the recap documents are helping to build to that, but we also wanted to make sure that we have opportunities for the task force to see the in an iterative way the versions of the report before it's ultimately finalized and submitted. And then we'll get to in the last quarter of the calendar year, we'll really start having that rich conversation around prevention. What abilities do we have to stop children and youth from running from care? Really considering the different circumstances, the kind of the different presentation and complexities of the children and youth that we're talking about. Potentially like having a myriad of prevention approaches that we're discussing based on the particular circumstances that we're talking about at the time. So more to come on that, but we wanted to again provide a preview of the how of the kinds of conversations that we anticipate having through the rest of the year to ultimately make good on the directives of the task force. Yes, ma'am. Stephanie, I see your hand raised.
You're muted.
Yeah,
there we go.
There we go.
I'm here. Yes, thank you. Yeah, Doris, thank you so much. And I just, if you don't mind, if I could put just a little bit of an emphasis on that last point, which is that last quarter. When we talk about prevention and what abilities do we have to stop children and youth from running from care, I've had the benefit of speaking to all of you individually and really just processing your perspective, where you come from, your experiences, and really your thoughts about this task force. And I just wanted to say that this particular subject really comes from my conversations with several individuals who, prevention can mean so many things to different people, right? It can mean everything from what can we do this week to prevent runaways? What can we do next month? What can we do in 1 year? And what can we do in 10 years? Right. And I just wanted to assure a couple of different members who really informed me a lot, which is, there's an urgency around this for many of our members, right, especially those who have experienced children in these systems, right? And I just wanted to say how much I appreciate that urgency, right? And really just respect that this section is designed to really start tackling those immediate solutions, if you will, as well as the longer term, right? So just wanted to put a finer point on that. And I'm just going to say, I want to actually thank Kevin and Elizabeth in particular, who have really helped me understand more deeply the desire to problem solve, because, as we sit as a task force and as we are thoughtful and greatly appreciate that thoughtfulness, we still have kids that are running as we sit here today. So I just wanted to respect those members' thoughts, let you know that it is here in our agenda, and we will be tackling it. Last thing, I just want to acknowledge Stephen Fisher, who's been a community member, who's been involved with youth who have run away from residential care facilities for decades. Gosh, Stephen, I think you and I first met when I was in the district attorney's office. Now I've dated myself. But you and I have been in touch over the years off and on this issue. And I know you too have expressed to me, just again, there's this urgency about keeping kids safe today as well as into the future. So I just want to thank you for sharing those perspectives over the years with me.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Stephanie. And I think that the last thing that I'll say before we move on to today's discussion is that, you'll notice that we have three meetings devoted to this particular topic. I think, in getting at the both the kind of identifying particular populations, subpopulations of kids to tackle and thinking about ways in which we can this task force can put forth some immediate, intermediate, and longer term prevention strategies will allow us to be able to have those nuanced conversations over the course of that last quarter. Any other questions or reflections before we start to dive into today's qualitative data discussion?
Doris, I would really love to kind of, I just want to push folks more directly of how is this landing? What are your thoughts, frustrations, questions? Yes, this feels good. Just really want to, this is, again, you all seeing this as how we're walking folks forward, but want to hear how that's landing as we look at the actual roadmap itself.
Well, I just want to thank you for putting together this slide. It really does help clarify for me, and I know for Kevin, important points on when we'll be discussing other options. So thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Appreciate that.
I think you need to call on people like in school.
I was literally just about to say, I'll give it a, I mean, I know we called out Elizabeth and Kevin. So Kevin, I'm actually going to call you out and say, I know you gave a little bit of feedback before, but curious now that you're seeing also month by month, just thoughts and reflections.
I'm good. Yeah, it all works for me.
All right, Kevin. Kevin's
Fantastic.
good. Kevin's good. Okay. Sergeant Cotter.
I saw a nod there.
Yeah, he's on mute. I don't know if he knows.
He's on mute. That's all right. Let's see. I'm looking at my list. Just bopping around. Beth.
There we go. Sorry, I couldn't find my mute button, darn thing. I think this is great. And I like that we have a little bit of a timeline, so it'll help frame the conversation each time that we go. So thank you for putting this together.
Cool. Beth, I said your name, so I'll make you share as well.
I'm going to second Sergeant Cotter there.
Okay. All right. Well, folks, I appreciate it. Again, we'll have an exit survey. And if you have more to say, or you have, additional ideas as we continue the conversation, we read each and every one of those and we appreciate your feedback. So Doris, thanks for framing that up so well to the point that folks are just complimenting you. So appreciate that. And we'll consider this, the roadmap moving forward. And of course, we know that we'll continue to revisit it. And thanks for everyone's feedback on that. All right, so moving into the discussion today, Jordan, if you could bring up this next slide again, bringing up this directive is current statewide qualitative data regarding the experiences of children who have run away from care sufficient. So I just want to couch us real quick. And so one of the things we need from you is similar to the last call where we took a poll just to get a pulse on the yes or no question that the task force answers them in the report of is current statewide. At the time it was quantitative data, now we're asking qualitative data. So I just want to talk about what we've received so far that you're answering yes or no to. So one, we heard from Stephanie of what's required, right? Both quantitative and qualitative from a law perspective. Two, we had the state come and present both quantitative and qualitative data as the way that they capture it. And we also heard from task force members the tension around trails, it being in trails, but is there a way to extract that? And the answer was that's in a way that's available to task force members. And the answer, from my understanding from you all, was no. And so really what we want to get at is just a very specific question before we move into, again, a product of this task force of an attempt at gathering deeper qualitative data from youth and former youth, is currently, with those pieces that I just outlined, is current statewide qualitative data regarding the experiences of children who have run away from care sufficient. Any additional context, Stephanie, from your perspective, particularly with your office, that I'm missing there that we want to make sure that folks are keeping in mind as they answer the question?
Regarding this qualitative piece, Trace?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that, as the slide indicates, this is one of our statutory charges. And, you know, the idea was, when the law was drafted to create this task force, there really was this acknowledgement that, you know, quantitative data, as all of you know, does not represent the totality of any complex public policy problem, right? And then indeed, it's about bringing in that qualitative data as well. Over the years, particularly in the last 5 to maybe 7, 10 years, there's been an increasing acknowledgement of the value of qualitative data, right? And the combination of those two pieces to create sound public policy solutions. So it's part of our statute, and the reason it's part of our statute, our authorizing statute here, is for those reasons.
Thanks, Stephanie. From a process perspective, I also just want to name, you'll see reflected in previous minutes. So when we take votes like these, we record them as yes or no for purposes of the report. And if anyone does not vote yes or no, we just record it as an abstention. So I did just want to name that part from a process perspective. You'll see that reflected in the minutes as well. So just wanted to call that out. And if anybody has any questions around the process piece of that, happy to have a conversation with you as we move forward, but just wanted to note that before we capture this vote. So before we move into the next piece, again, we are taking a quick poll from task force members. And again, our Zoom is giving us trouble with the poll function. And so we're going to utilize the technical piece of the chat, which is you're going to place in the chat a simple yes or no to this question, as you see reflected both on the slide and the chat. And we'll document that for purposes of the report, and then we'll move on into the report today.
Hey, Trace.
Yes.
I'm having trouble figuring out in my mind exactly what qualitative data is. What are some examples of qualitative data as opposed to quantitative data?
Yeah, so Doris, I'll lean on you to help me answer this, but I think a real easy way to describe that is the experiences, the quality of folks' experiences of the children who have run from care, right? So again, examples would be, do we have ways to capture the experience of that child when they ran, and does it actually influence the decisions we make after of what we do with that information? Doris, if you have more explicit examples from your experience.
Yeah, one way to distinguish them in my mind is quantitative data is really about numbers. It's usually counts.
Right.
So, you know, how many kids ran away, how many kids ran from a particular facilities, how many kids of a particular, you know, subpopulation, say age, ran away. The qualitative data is usually more narrative in nature. So it provides the the underlying, you know, what were some of the characteristics of the young people that ran away from a particular facility, for instance, and sort of bringing those pieces together. The questions around why or root causes, those are typically going to be found in your qualitative kinds of data. Does that help? Did that clarify for you?
Yeah, that helps. That helps. Yeah.
You're still not quite there
yeah,
yet.
so, and Kevin, I might, if I'm gonna, and then Renee, I'm seeing your hand up. If I had to guess, I'm wondering if you're kind of wondering what qualitative data have we received to be able to answer this question. And so, you know, the point I would make there is that the conversations we've had to date are what's available to us. And so so as you know, Doris is explaining what qualitative data is, and the conversations we've had to date around what is available to understand the experiences of children who have run away. Is it sufficient? Is it enough for a group like this that's talking around the next pieces? Is it enough to really understand the experiences of those kids and what to do about it? And Renee, I see your hand up, so I'm not sure if you're wanting to talk about this piece of the conversation.
Well, actually, I just want to ask for clarification about the question. Is it enough for our purposes? And are we talking about also including the report that was commissioned by this group that was supplied this, for this meeting? Or are we talking about, is it enough like in the state system for the use of professionals who work with kids? Yeah, so enough for what purpose, I guess I'm wondering.
So
Like
you want me to chime-
enough to inform ongoing work in the trail system and for, that, like, does trails good enough is what are we asking, or do we have enough information as a group?
Renee, I think it would be the ongoing systems piece.
Okay.
Yeah. So
And
again,
that would exclude this report because this report was developed specifically as part of the charge for this task force.
right. And Stephanie or Jordan, even do either of y'all want to add any context as far as from your perspective? Just want to invite that just in case.
No, I don't think anything additional than what's been said.
Okay. So again, we're capturing votes in the chat as yes or no to this question. You'll see displayed on the screen and also dropped in the chat, and we'll give it 1 minute. If folks decline to vote, we'll record that as an abstention for purposes of process. Give it about 30 more seconds. I just want to make sure I'm giving folks enough time. Also, you can we can capture it in the exit survey if folks are still thinking. I need a minute. Certainly not trying to push you in answering right this second. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for that. That was a lot of talking on our end. And so I appreciate your patience as we kind of get us up to speed on, again, it continues to feel like we're doing some of the housekeeping pieces, but I think that this really lands us in a place where we now understand where we are, where we're headed. And so really just appreciate the discussion and the pushes this morning from you all. Stephanie, I'm going to hand it over to you. We're now kind of moving into the conversation piece to this report we've talked so much about. And so, Stephanie, if you could introduce our guest today and give us a little context on this report, appreciate folks. Thanks.
Sure. So as all of you should have in your possession, yes, head nods. Yes, fantastic. The report that was commissioned as a result, again, of the legislation which authorizes this task force. Again, as I mentioned just a few moments ago, the idea was really to try and provide a full-fledged picture for the task force from many different perspectives of individuals who are impacted by the issue of youth who run from care. So the report was commissioned and Dr. Kristen Myers, whom I believe you all met way up front in the beginning of this, has been working diligently with facility staff and youth in those facilities to really try to capture their experiences about what it means to run, why did they run, talking about their returns, et cetera. The report captures all of that. Kristen is with the University of Denver's Colorado Evaluation and Action Lab, and she'll be presenting the findings of her report momentarily. I just want to add that from our agency's perspective, we're really pleased to partner with the University of Denver on this project. They have really been heavily engaged in this state's, Colorado's, child welfare efforts on a number of different levels, a number of different policy issues, and have a really, I believe, a first-rate group of researchers and evaluators, and it was why they were selected for this project. So, Kristen, I just want to thank you for joining us, and I will let you take it from here.
Great, thank you so much. Sorry, I was just trying to answer a chat to Jordan. Yes, it would be great if you could run this slide deck. So thank you. Thank you all for being here today. I'm excited to share this work with you. Really appreciated the conversation so far this morning. And I think after hearing all of the task force meetings from the beginning, I think that this data that you're about to see is really reflective of a lot of the conversations that have already been happening in this group. So I think just going into understanding what's in this report, and going to give you just an overview of that today. I'm not sure you're going to hear that there's much that's new in terms of content or in terms of the conversations that have already been happening. And just getting back to the conversation that Renee brought up earlier in terms of that why question, that's something that is very reflective of what we found here in this report, that it is very complex. There's a lot of different things that add, and no two situations are the same. So I think just honoring the complexity of this and just kind of showing you what I've heard more in general. So in this qualitative research, my role was to really listen and contextualize all the things that we were hearing from the youth and from the providers. So if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. Great. So the purpose of this report, and Stephanie did a nice job of outlaying that this is a part of the charge of this group, a requirement in this, in the House Bill 22-1375, of asking focus groups these particular questions. So these are the framing questions that went in to trying to understand this issue better. So the charging questions were: what conditions led to running from an out-of-home placement? What efforts were made to locate a child or youth after a running incident? What services were provided to the child or youth after a running incident? And what programmatic and systemic barriers, that's a mouthful, make it difficult to prevent a run from occurring? So those were the overarching questions there. A little bit about the demographics. There were a total of 5 groups that were held, 2 groups with providers and 3 groups with youth. We had 15 providers that spoke to their experiences, and 21 youth that ranged from ages 12 to 17. And we were able to get a wide representation of Southern Colorado, Northern Colorado, and in the metro area. So we had, by happenstance and by a lot of the work here, thank you for the providers that are on this call for helping me arrange these meetings and get to talk to these people and capture their experiences. And go to the next slide. All right, so an overview of the process, and I so much, Renee, I keep picking on you, but I really appreciate hearing when you ask somebody why, especially teenagers, they're going to say, well, I don't know. That's usually what you hear. So we developed a semi-structured interview protocol to get to that why, but asking some different questions to get to that context. So I developed a semi-structured interview protocol and sent that out to the task force members to get some feedback on that, to make sure that we were asking the right questions and having the best use of our time in these focus groups. All of the groups were audio recorded to make sure that we were capturing exactly what folks said, and then they were transcribed into written form. So these are the exact words that you see in the report of the participants. And then 3 independent researchers, so myself and then 2 other folks, reviewed the transcripts and developed these themes. that you can see in the report. So we wanted to make sure that we were all reading the same thing. And it's important to mention that some of us that read these have background in child welfare, but not necessarily subject matter experts, and certainly not on this particular issue. So what you're seeing is folks that that have some knowledge of this, but we don't come with any kind of bias or any kind of preconceived notions about what we were finding. And then we added some supporting quotes that we thought really highlighted the themes and included those in the report. Next slide. All right. So some of the highlights that you'll see, and if you look in your materials in the Google Drive, you'll see that this particular slide has some additional notes to it so that you can see some of those highlights a little bit further there. But some of the things that we found were some of the conditions that led to running from an out-of-home placement. And this part was really consistent with the literature. The previous researchers that presented to this group a couple meetings ago, as well as some of the former studies that were done in this area, was really consistent with that. Youth were either running from something or running to something, or at some points, just typical adolescent behavior, making silly choices, doing things on impulse that was not necessarily a deeper issue there. And so some of those running from, there really was trying to understand this really from a fight, flight, or freeze perspective. A lot of youth that are in these facilities have experienced trauma. And so when they have trauma triggers, that can put them into a fight, flight, or freeze mode in their brains. And so they aren't necessarily thinking, I'm going to leave this facility right now. It's a impulse decision in terms of a self-protective decision. And as we were mentioning before, all of those circumstances that could have led up to that moment. And who knows what that actual trigger might be. It could be the phone call. It could be, a youth that they had an interaction with a youth after having already a bad day, or these things like that. So that was consistent. And then the running to was running to familiarity. Running to family was very prevalent. Friends, people that they know, people that they felt safe with, and really desiring to have connections with people that were familiar to them. And then in terms of the efforts that were made to locate a child or youth after a running incident, I think this was also very consistent with the conversations that providers have had in this group in terms of having protocols. So each provider has a protocol where they will involve law enforcement. They follow steps to try to find the youth after running. And so there were providers that expressed some frustration in feeling that they didn't have a ton of autonomy in that, in being able to locate a child, that it was all very reactive in that. And then the services that were provided to a youth after a run, that was also very much protocol related. So overall, they were really trying to return that child to physical and psychological safety. So debriefing, making sure that they have a shower, that if they had any wounds that they had on their run, that those were cleaned up, and talking to them and getting them to a place where they can relate, and getting them calm and being able to go back to the regular population there in the facility. And then the programmatic and systemic barriers that made it difficult from a run occurring. Again, this is where I'm going to not profess to be a subject matter expert, but there was a lot of talk from the providers about not having a lot of autonomy because of a specific term, which would be the imminent risk term. And so that they pretty consistently said that was not clearly defined enough, and that a lot of providers were fearful of things that might happen to them as providers from a state perspective, from a licensing perspective, if they were out of bounds in that area. And from the child perspective, something that really came up here was that connectedness piece. And a lot of people, the providers and the kids both, named being short-staffed, not having enough people to go to, not having enough people to spread around. So, you know, a lot of them said, you know, I've been waiting to talk to somebody for a really long time, but there's not enough people. And so if I was able to get talked down, I wouldn't have left, those kinds of things. And so this is where we really captured a lot of the youth feeling connected to the people, some of the providers, those relationship pieces when they were able to have when they were able to have those conversations and when they were able to calm down and get out of that fight, flight, or freeze mode. Oftentimes that would prevent them from leaving and from running in the first place, and not having access to that and not having enough people on that. And the provider spoke to this too, of basically, if you have you know, a ton of people that or one person that is requiring a lot of resources, that's taking away from the rest of the people that are there, and there's just not enough people to go around. So those were kind of the overall things, the programmatic and systemic barriers. And next slide. So that connectedness piece, so kind of looking at, you know, if you had it to do over again, or what has kept you from running, that's another thing that came up quite a bit, was the consequences of, well, it's just not worth it. You know, I've come here, I've worked so far, we get incentives, we get these things, we get trusted, and I don't want to lose all of my belongings and my shoes and everything else. And so sometimes they would be able to think about those consequences ahead of time. Again, if they were not in a moment of trauma response, they were able to think about that ahead of time and make a different decision. So those were things that thwarted a running incident. And again, that connected that piece, the connectedness, where if someone was feeling disconnected, they were out of there. They're seeking connection from somewhere. So if they're not going to get that from their immediate environment, they were finding it somewhere else. And that desire to have connections with the staff. Again, that fear of consequences, that was really big. And yeah, and also connectedness with peers. That was another thing that youth spoke to, of having them talk to each other, where they would maybe say, you know, you don't want to lose these privileges. You've come so far. Do you really want to do this? And so sometimes their peers would talk them out of that as well. So yeah, I think that those were, again, it wasn't anything groundbreaking or anything that you all didn't already know about. I hope that this report can contextualize a lot of these conversations that we had with the youth and with the providers to provide direction for that. And so, yeah, these key takeaways, again, connectedness is running prevention. It's also intervention, and it's aftercare. So how a youth is treated after they return and returning back to that feeling connected to their environment and to the providers, that can hopefully prevent an additional running incident. And again, youth run from placements when they are dysregulated. And basically that dysregulation piece means that they are in that fight, flight, or freeze mode. They are responding to something. They don't necessarily have access to that logic part of our brain, that frontal lobe, where all of us, you know, when you're thinking, okay, that just makes me want to scream in this meeting. And you're like, okay, well, maybe that's not a good idea to scream in this meeting. They don't have access to that part of their brain in those moments. And so they tend to run when they are experiencing that dysregulation. Again, they're running to connectedness and familiarity. Also, the other thing that came up is youth test boundaries. They have a desire for autonomy. So some things that I guess, if there were any surprises that came out from this, is really speaking to, we're talking about kids, and kids are going to act like kids. They're going to test boundaries. They're going to do silly things. They're going to do that. And one thing that really came out in this report that was concerning is that they don't always understand the consequences of what that means. It's like, you know, I'm going to go get this ride from somebody that's on the interstate, not really thinking about that could be a really dangerous situation. So in their eyes, they might be doing something that is silly or leaving and not really understanding that there could be really big consequences to that. And then those programmatic and systemic barriers, that is in the report, making it difficult to prevent running. And And then also a need for state agencies and providers to work together to define what imminent danger is in terms of running prevention. And so that they can really come up with strategies that work for everybody and provide that clarity together. And that is an overview. This is my contact information. I worked with the lab on this, and I'm at University of Northern Colorado, but working with the lab, so you can contact either one of us if you have questions. Kristen Kloppenstein is at the lab full-time, so that's her full-time job. So if you have any questions from the lab perspective, she can answer those, and anything about the report, I'm happy to answer questions here or any follow-up questions that come up later.
I have a question. I can't find my hand up thing. Oh, there it is. Okay.
You're good, Kevin. I got you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with you. First of all, great report. I agree with you that most of the report didn't come as a surprise, but there was one big surprise to me that didn't seem to come up, and that had to do with the whole peer pressure copycat sort of thing, part of running away. You know, I'm here as a parent. My son, you know, was a runner, ran from a lot of facilities, and he almost always ran in groups. You know, either as a top dog who's pressuring other kids, or as that didn't seem to come up. And what was more surprising is one of the people in your task force, one of the providers, and I had that conversation a couple of times, and so many times, you know, someone. So I just want to get your reaction to that, or kind of, did that come up and it didn't make the report, or did it just never come up, or I was just.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that actually kind of surprised me too. And it didn't come up. It came up maybe once or twice, but it wasn't enough to say that it was a general theme that came up for everybody. You know, and it was kind of in relation to that typical behavior of, hey man, you want to get out of here, or you know, you want to do these things, or having that if people are kind of getting in trouble together. So it came up, but I wouldn't say that it was a big part of the conversation. You know, and again, we're talking about 21 people from different settings. And if I talk to 21 different people, maybe that would be a major theme. So yeah, that didn't come up here as something that was major, but I think it's definitely relevant.
Kevin, I think on that note, Kristen, I mean, I think the thing that pulled out there is like also our kids thinking around their self-awareness around peer pressure in that situation versus their own individual experience, right? And not being able to maybe differentiate between the two is kind of something I kind of read through connected to your question. So it's a great question, Kevin.
Yeah.
Certainly something I hope that you'll capture that when we do our breakouts later, that you'll capture that as a key question of how might we dig deeper on that. Renee and then Jana.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I agree. It was a great report. And yeah, like you said, even though maybe not a lot of super new information, I thought it was a very digestible way and organized way to help kind of organize thinking a lot. So I thought it was really helpful. I was wondering, could you describe the types of placements that the staff or the kids were from? Meaning, I don't know if we're talking sort of all fairly high-end residential placements with kids who have more mental health issues, or if we're talking, you know, RCCFs, and it doesn't look like any of these were like family foster homes or anything like that. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding what types of placements we're talking about, and that the staff are from and the kids are from for this report.
Yeah, that's a great question. This is where my not subject matter expert comes in on what types of placements there are out there. I can tell you one that I visited was definitely a very high level of care with acute needs, with youth with severe mental health needs, and that was pretty apparent. The other facilities were smaller than that, and a little bit more of a just more of a residential setting where there was a school. One of the focus groups was held during the school day at one of the schools that they had connected to the facility. And you're correct, there were not any foster homes that were part of the study.
Thanks.
And I would say that with those different settings, and they felt different in terms of how I was greeted and how the things that, you know, you have to go through in order to get into the building and things like that. I would say there was not a lot of variation though in what the youth were saying, regardless of the settings. And a lot of them had talked about being in a lot of different settings. So they were really speaking maybe not to that particular setting that they were in at the time of the interview, but they were talking about their experiences in general. So it could be representative of other places as well, not just the place that they were in currently.
Kristen, I appreciate that. And Renee, you know, we're balancing the delicate act of anonymity of the report and protecting the identities of youth and staff for obvious reasons. And also we can get together as a team after and work with Kristen if there's a more specific way to answer your question that still ensures anonymity of the participants, but also maybe gets more directly at what you're asking from the content side. So we'll follow up on that if that's helpful.
Yeah, it might be possible just to say like the licensing designation.
Sure.
You know, I think in most cases that wouldn't impact anonymity, except potentially in 1 or 2 cases where there's so
Sure.
few. But
I think I got you. I think there'll be a way to give a little bit more information. So we'll follow up specifically on that piece, but I just wanted to name Krista. I appreciate your efforts and from your experience, but I hear you too saying, so we'll follow up Renee with that. And I think that's a great push. So appreciate that. Jana, coming to you.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you for including this idea that adolescents don't behave. This is what you know, if you took me back when I was a kid, I didn't behave. I think we need to kind of always keep that in our mind, that it's really hard to be a kid. You put trauma on top of that. You put a bad neighborhood on top of that. You put drugs on top. I mean, this is something that I really appreciate that you said. I know that studies can't be all inclusive, but I am wondering why foster homes would not be included. To me, this is so important because it's so hard to get foster parents. It's so hard to be. I was a foster parent. It's so hard to be a foster parent, and I think it's really important that we see what's going on in this issues with foster families.
I would 100% agree with that. I think from this perspective of our quick timeline on things and just from a recruiting and trying to get folks together. So it was really more of a logistical thing than being intentionally left out. I think that would be great next steps.
Okay, beautiful.
From that perspective as well. Absolutely. They definitely were not intentionally left out.
Yeah, no, and I know, you know, sometimes you have to focus on one thing or the other. You can't include everything. I feel like foster homes really aren't talked about much in our group. And I think that's pretty important. The second thing I wanted to ask you, Kristen, is have gangs. I mean, this is my experience. Gangs are extremely powerful in pulling the kids one way or the other within the group and then out, you know, for the runs. Was that ever discussed at all?
You know, it wasn't, and I could see why from a kid perspective of maybe being afraid to bring that information up or bringing that into the room. But that wasn't something that came up in this. And yet I could see where that could be a huge
And
issue.
again, Kristen, that's such a great insight because I don't think kids would tell you the truth. Let's say they are sad because somebody in their family died. I don't think they're going to say, I was feeling sad. They've got this image that they're creating and that they, you know, I don't think they're going to say, somebody hurt my feelings. I don't think they're going to say, I missed my old neighborhood. And I don't think they're going to tell you the truth when you say, why did you run?
Yeah, I think, you know, and I did try to avoid that direct why question very intentionally in asking youth of really tell me more about what happened. What was happening right before? What was happening? You know, was there a reason why you went to this particular place or, you know, trying to get into that? And I think that in this particular study, I felt like the youth were really honest. They maybe were not providing any additional information, but I think they were honest about their experiences. And that could be the way some of that process was that I ensured their anonymity. They came up with a whole fake name, so I never even knew their real names. And the staff did a really great job of saying, you know, none of this is going to come back at you if you share your experience. We just want to know what happened. This is not something you're going to be in trouble for later. And so setting that tone, I feel that they were able to feel safe. And, you know, and with the focus groups, it would kind of start out small where, you know, somebody would give a little bit of information, but then they started feeling more and more comfortable to share. And yeah, to one that went on for almost an hour and a half. So
I
yeah.
love that you protected them. I think that is really important.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Jenna, I'll jump in and say too, part of our process today is we'll after we take a break, we're going to go into breakout rooms and talk around what would it look like to have mechanisms that would result in this sort of ongoing qualitative data moving forward. What would it take? And I think you'll have I hope you'll take that first piece of the foster home piece being an integral part of this conversation and give that feedback into the kind of prompting questions we give so that we can be sure to capture it that way, as well as that you would suggest that that's an explicit group that we continue to ensure we include. So just want to name that piece that there'll be, we're capturing it now also in the notes, but there'll be a chance for you to kind of just name that that's a gap for you and that you would like to see that reflected in qualitative data in any sort of recommendation this group might make. So,
All right.
yeah, appreciate that, Jenna. Beth, I'm seeing your hand raised. I'll go to you next.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what Jana said of like, what I have found in reviewing with juvenile arrest reports, it's very rare that it's the juvenile who's actually disclosing the gang involvement. That's usually coming from parent or guardian or other additional reports. And a lot of times when you're directly asking, of course, the answer is just going to be no. And then similar with like, I know most pretrial teams, they in the screening, they'll do like a craft report, which is more like the substance use. And what they have found is youth are now, when they're gauging it initially from intake, they're saying, you know, no, I don't consume these drugs. I don't consume alcohol. And then pretrial continues to engage with them. And they're seeing an uptick in like, well, why is all of a sudden a youth using more drugs now that pretrial is engaging? And that's not the case. It's just that they've built rapport and trust with their pretrial assigned worker. And so they're more inclined to open up about it as opposed to just a one and done. So I think we need to be mindful of that when looking at these initial answers.
Appreciate that, Beth. I think that's a good thing to call out too, again, when we kind of capture the complexities of gathering this sort of data. What gaps do we know because of your experience, right? And we're kind of counting on you all to name those gaps based on your experience. So I just heard you say, you know, in my experience, this is what we know is true. So I appreciate you naming that piece, and would just encourage other folks as well from your experience of like, obviously there is no perfect way to capture this sort of this qualitative data piece. And so what suggestions or what things should we be mindful of as this group has this discussion? So appreciate that, Beth. Kristen, anything else or any other lingering questions? That we're coming to the end of our time here and I want to give folks a break. So anything else for Kristen before we say thank you so much. Again, I think I've heard loud and clear that it was a good report. It was well organized, easy to read and digest, and really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through your process and some of the challenges and things that you felt along the way. But any other questions from folks before we move on? Doris.
So I had a question about, I actually had two questions. For the staffing issues, was that just about, just effectively just not having enough staff at a facility, and or was there anything that came up around kids potentially not being in the right kind of a placement that sometimes is impacted by just like staffing and capacity, and so we don't have availability in one place, so you have kids kind of mismatched, their needs are mismatched to the actual kind of placement. Did anything around that come up as well?
That's a great question. Yeah, the needs mismatch did not come up. That's not really something that came up in the conversation, which could be something that was just not asked or didn't come up in that context. And yes, and the answer to your first question is that it was a lack of people, like a lack of adult to child ratio.
Okay.
Is being disclosed, especially from the youth. I was kind of surprised that came up mostly from them and not necessarily from the providers as much.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
And then I had another question about the, you mentioned that and in the report that consequences, like sort of like fear of consequences, was a deterrent for some youth from running away. And I know it's a relatively small sample, but was that more true for youth who frequently ran? Or could you even like draw those kind of distinctions for whom that actually seemed to make a difference?
That is a great question. And yes, I think that it came up in the peer conversations of, that do you really want to do that? Because you know what's going to happen to you, right? That kind of thing, or them seeing it happen. Some of the youth that we interviewed hadn't ever had a run from there. And they're saying, well, I wouldn't want to, I see people coming back and I don't want that for me.
Okay.
So that would come up. And yes, the youth who would have that, it's like, okay, I've been through this before. I know what it's like to lose all of my privileges and I don't really want to do that. And it's interesting you brought that up too, just something that was an arbitrary after the fact where I wish I would have had my recorder on just talking to everyone the whole time I was there, because sometimes these stories would come out later of there was a staff member that said, one of the people you were talking to was about to run last night. They left the facility, they went out in front, somebody followed them out front and said, is this really what you want? You're mad right now, I get it. And they talked them down and the youth was like, you know what, it's not what I want. And so you would hear a lot of things like that too. And that was a youth who had a history of running from multiple placements and from that facility and previous facilities.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And I would say too, just to speak to that qualitative piece, that, the more anonymous you can make it for kids, the more you're going to get for those things. One thing when I was in the foster care world, there was an organization that youth had put on and they created these Dear Adult letters, which I think that might be useful in this setting too, for what it's worth of being able to, when you ask these questions, in my experience with the focus groups, they want to tell you. They're like, what? No consequences? I can just say what I want? And they really wanted to talk to me. So that's for whatever that's worth from a research side of things.
Thank you so much for that, Kristen. And I see Renee has her hand up.
Yeah, Doris, I was actually just gonna also add some thoughts regarding your question and points about staffing, because you're asking about, does it mean they're in the wrong level of care? And it sounds like that didn't come up as a specific thing in the responses, but I think it's important to note that the staffing ratios is often determined by the level of care. So which I think many of us are aware of, but when there's talk about not enough staff, I mean, that's something that it's not because staffing shortages per se, like these places have ratios that are required to meet, and I'm sure Brandon or someone else could speak more accurately on that, but it comes down to the level of care and what's required, and there's not really funding to do additional staffing above. So that becomes just a complex issue. I think it's important to think about if one of the key issues here is that if there were more staff around, then that would make a difference. Then that, is be something that, it'd be important to look at the ways to address that. It's not something that centers themselves can just do, or it's not just going to get better with time when, there's fewer staff shortages other places. It's funding and required ratios and all that.
Sure. Yeah. And I think the thing that I was thinking about, in addition to just sort of the numbers piece, is around the skill, like engagement skills, and sort of like the being able to engage with the youth who have particular and specific kinds of needs. And so when I was reading about some of the commentary from and themes that came from the youth around I don't know that kids can always articulate like whether or not it was access to any person or whether it was access to a person who knew how to talk to me in a way that might have actually served as a mitigating factor. And so I was trying, and some of that might have to do with like the type of facility and whether they specialize in, you know, in kids who have a, you know, specific kind of need versus. So that's sort of like what was like ruminating in my mind and just trying to see if there was a way to tease that out. If
Yeah,
that makes
Doris,
sense.
I would so agree with that. I love how you put that together, because that was what I was hearing from the youth. It wasn't just any warm body being there. It was again centered around that connectedness piece of like, I don't have access to the person who makes me feel safe. I have, and a lot of the youth in every facility that I visited, they really talked about having these couple staff members where they felt really connected to. One youth talked about when they returned back, that they were completely dysregulated. They were out of control. They had to be restrained. And then this one staff member came in that they trusted, and the staff member said, "What's going on?" And they completely like melted down and connected with that staff member, and they were fine in 5 minutes. So it really was centered around youth feeling like they are connected to a staff member, rather than just numbers alone.
Okay, thank you. And I saw that I did some additional thoughts. There's some raised hands, and I know Trace, you're probably trying to move us along.
No. I appreciate, we have some time to flex into this discussion, and I want to make sure that we give enough time. So appreciate, Doris, your push and thoughts there. Dennis and Stephanie, y'all were a tie with your hand raised. And Dennis, I haven't heard from you today. So Stephanie, you're second place now. And Dennis, would love for you to come off and share with us.
Okay, so well, the discussion on staff ratios is pretty interesting. We've CDHS has been looking at staff to youth ratios in QRTPs and PRTFs. We haven't really looked at it from the lens of runaways. We've been looking at it more from the lens of behaviorally acute children and youth, and what it takes to maintain them in facilities. So there was a comment about we have to look at like the how to fund facilities to do this. We're doing an actuarial analysis of provider rates. Right now, we're going in with the assumption that it used to be that the rate would fund a 6-to-1 child to staff ratio in RCCF and in QRTP. We're now looking for the rate to fund a 3-to-1 staff to child ratio. So we are looking pretty heavily at staff to child ratios, and we're hoping we can mitigate those significantly.
Dennis, hugely helpful to have that context, and really appreciate you kind of bringing that to the point of the group. So something just for folks to keep in mind as they continue that. It sounds like we're asking the right questions if that's what you all are already diving in and working on. So I appreciate that alignment there. Stephanie, come to you, and then we'll go to Elizabeth.
Yeah, and Dennis, thanks for that information. I think I had another question for you, and that is how are those staffing ratios determined? What is the formula? Is this a national standard? Are they local standards? Is it based on the various type of facility and the treatment they administer? I was just curious about how that comes about.
Well, it's definitely a combination of all those things, but we also have to balance that with what the legislature gives us for the daily rate, because we can't have staff to child ratios at 3-to-1 if we're only paying them $300 a day. They can't afford to staff up to 3-to-1. We've learned a lot from the facility down at Southern Peaks around like staffing facilities, and Southern Peaks is an outlier because of they're serving like really behaviorally high acuity children. I said really 3 times, but okay. So they're serving the toughest kids, right? But we've learned a lot about how if we want providers to be successful with the children and youth, how to staff it appropriately. And so we're at this point we found that when we contract with a facility and we can resource them with what they need, we can be successful. So that's how we came to 3-to-1. It was just like experimenting with providers like Laredon, Southern Peaks, and really seeing what the formula was for success.
Thanks, Dennis. And Stephanie, does that get at your question there? Okay, appreciate that. Elizabeth and then Brandon.
Dennis, I just want to thank you for that information. And I just wanted to say that that is a key piece. Timmy was at a private facility in the summer of 2019 for about 7 months, and their staffing ratio was 3 staff members to 10 kids. So on the unit at all times. Plus, they had I can't remember what they call it, but you know, they would have one staff member that you connected with personally, and that was your primary staff member, right? So even when that person wasn't on shift, you knew when that person was coming back. And he had a really close bond with all the staff members there. Only at the end did he start to run, and I think that was more, you know, he figured out how to do it. He was following the other kids' examples, you know. But it definitely made a huge difference in the way he was treated. So I think that's important. That's all.
Certainly important, Elizabeth, and appreciate you sharing that perspective and Timothy's experience there. Brandon, I'm seeing you, and then I'm gonna move us into a break because I think we could we could all use a quick stretch. So go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, so I just wanted to speak on to the staffing ratios. So we have 2 programs that are 1-to-1, and then 2 programs that are 1-to-4. And what we've noticed for the past year at our 1-to-1 programs with staffing ratios, that the ratio itself does not stop the kid's desire to run at times. Like we have a frequency of kids when they're in that moment still wanting to run. What it does do is it protects the treatment community when you have the higher ratios, so you don't have that snowball effect of other kids getting disrupted and having issues because of that kid, you know, in that fight or flight mode at that moment. So we've noticed an improvement in that arena, but we, you know, having a 1 staff there per that kid, if that kid's in crisis, you know, it's still going to come down to fight or flight. That 1 staff member being present isn't necessarily going to stop their trauma response. If that makes sense, if I'm making sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And Brandon, I appreciate your perspective there on just like realistically what this actually looks like in practice in your experience at your facility. So thank you for bringing that up. What I'm going to do for us is clearly we need to put a pin in this conversation around staffing. It's just something that folks are interested in understanding more about. Dennis, it sounds like you'll have updates as we go along as the progress that the state is making in that move for the increased funding piece. So I'm just making a note for our team that this is something that we'll continue to revisit as it relates to the continued work on the directives. Kristen, we got away a bit from the report, so I just want to bring it back to say thank you for again, because this is exactly what we were hoping, which is it's not just explicitly report, but also like what does it bring out for folks? What questions does it bring out, and how's it pushing our thinking? So thank you again for such an excellent report, and also for being here today and being willing to answer our questions and put up with the pushing there. So appreciate your work on this. With that, I'm going to tell us we need to take a quick break, and we do have some extra time in our agenda. So I'm going to give us to 9:50. And then we'll bring it back. So please be back right at 9:50, and we're gonna go into some breakout groups and get you all talking. So step away from your computer, get some water, take care of yourself, and we'll see you back in 12 minutes. Thank you. We're gonna do breakout rooms to dive a little deeper on a few key prompts. I want to be clear that as we looked at that roadmap and we know what folks are eager to really get to, it's those pieces that feel tangible, where folks have momentum, and we also have to do our due diligence as a task force with the directives we've been given, right? So there's some things where I know people are like, we're still here, but we want to ensure that as we continue to write this report, we're doing it with fidelity and integrity to the process itself. And so just appreciate folks' patience as we continue these conversations and get through these directives in meaningful ways. What I would love to do is to break us out with these prompts that we have. I'll go over those in a second. And really the idea is that at the end, we'll be asking the question of, given the conversation, and given the way the directive is written, are you as a group comfortable moving on from this topic and moving into the next directive at the next meeting, right? So that's kind of what we're aiming towards, is ensuring that folks are giving the feedback, the questions, the thoughts, the things they're wrestling with, the recommendations they have in their brain, that we're capturing that in these conversations, and that we're then able to move on from a process perspective. So we'll kind of ask that question at the end. I'm going to kick us into breakout groups here in a minute, and I want to just quickly go over, we'll do similar to what we've done in the past, which is the note catcher, both for our purposes, but also for you to be able to capture. So when you go into these groups, if someone could just quickly volunteer themselves as someone willing to capture notes, obviously feel free halfway through to kick it to someone else in your group. We really want you all to take ownership in these conversations and not feel like we're dictating how or where you go in them. So we have some prompting questions, but we also want you to take it where you want, and please be sure to capture notes so that we understand. And then we'll come back, we'll do a larger group debrief. Someone will share it from your group of what you all kind of like coalesced around, what the conversation was around and what you got into. And then we'll close out the conversation for the day. So I'm going to drop into the chat the note catcher. Give folks a chance to bring that up. You'll see your groups on the left, and you'll see the questions across the top. One, general reflections and information and content from the report. Reflections on information and content from the report. This is where I would see any lingering thoughts you have. You know, I know the staffing piece was one, for instance. Anything else that you want to really capture as general reflections in addition to the conversation we've already had, please do so there. If you as a group or as an individual are ready to move on from that particular reflection piece, there are some other prompting questions across the top. You know, as we think about any sorts of suggestions or ways that we're writing this report as it relates to what qualitative data collection might or could look like moving forward, we have prompts kind of in that vein, which is, would this type of process, and I say this type of process, meaning some sort of like report that you just heard, would this type of process be beneficial for gathering qualitative data moving forward? Again, we're talking about those ongoing systems piece. So Kevin, to your point earlier, we're not talking about for the purposes of this task force, but now we're talking about when we go and say with the work of this task force, here's what we're recommending, here's what we think would be beneficial for the ongoing work of ensuring the continued safety of these kids. You know, is this type of gathering beneficial? Second, would this kind of data / analysis be useful to gather more regularly? If yes, what systems might have to be in place for this to occur, frequency, et cetera? We know that with every good idea comes the necessary conversation of how would we operationalize this? So from your perspective, what could or should or would that look like? What's meaningful frequency in gathering this type of data? We know that the challenges of kids 5 years ago are different, and facilities 5 years ago are different from the challenges today, and they will be different in another 5 years. Is 5 years the right frequency? Is there a different frequency that your group would suggest? And then, you know, just with your knowledge and understanding of the systems that would have to be in place to do that in a meaningful way, what are your ideas around that? From your various perspectives. And then if these prompting questions aren't enough and you have additional ideas or thoughts that your group is really wrestling with, we have a space there if there's a different direction that you want to go and the way that you're thinking about this question. But again, this is all in service of really answering this question around qualitative data and what you would like to see from your perspective moving forward, given that all of you at this point have answered that the data is not sufficient. Anything else from anyone on our team or Stephanie as chair? Any additional context of what you're really hoping to hear the group wrestle with here? Otherwise, I'm gonna kick you out into your groups. Any questions from folks? Do I need to do a song and dance to get in? Like, are we good? Everybody's good? All right, cool. Okay. Again, we're not going to keep you for the sake of keeping you. So we will pop in after about 15 minutes to see how the conversations are going. We've got about 30 minutes total set aside for these conversations. But if there's not momentum past 15 minutes, then we'll read the room and bring you back and debrief and move on. But we want to make sure we set aside enough time should you all want to continue the conversation. So I will kick you into breakout groups now. We'll be in the main room as facilitators and then popping around if you have any questions let us know. Otherwise, we will be bringing you back. We'll pop in at the 15-minute mark and see how things are going. And if anything, we'll bring you back at 10:30. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Sorry, I had a lot. We had a lot. We were talking and talking and talking.
No. No need to apologize. Appreciate you all. Sounds like a really rich discussion. So appreciate that and appreciate the notes you all took. I have a quick question around this kind of survey piece that you referenced. I just want to make sure I'm understanding a couple things. Like, was there any conversation around the differentiation that might be needed around how to like that, survey is one element of capturing data, but we also might need, someone literally walking into a facility or into foster homes to gather this in a way, because, to Ashley's point around anonymity and trusting the integrity of that anonymity with a human versus a survey. I'm curious if that came up at all, and maybe a differentiated approach of that, or was it really just this idea of like, we know, generally speaking, this is the cadence of needing to capture that information that might be in the form of a survey, but we would need to explore further of like the actual operationalizing of that. Sorry if I
Yeah, I don't think we got that deep into
Okay,
the actual management of it. It was just like this need for the information. And I think volume will drive some of it, budget will drive some of it, but this
like the
need to
how
know.
Sure. So, but it sounds like really what we should be taking from that is more the cadence that you're suggesting. It needs to be ongoing, kind of per our original points around changes of the needs and the changes of the challenges that kids might be experiencing. Stephanie, want to give you a chance to.
Yeah, Brian, thank you. I just wanted to put a slightly finer point on the notion of quality control standards for this reason. Facilities in the United States, they have compliance-driven standards, right? But that's very different than quality control outcome measurements. And everyone who knows me knows I've been on a soapbox on this one for probably 3 years now, and not been terribly successful, I might add. But my point is, when we're talking about qualitative experience, I think it's important to make sure we're not just talking about capturing voice. We also really need to capture the experiences, the quality of the experience, and how that contributes, right, to a young person's ability to engage and or remain in treatment or at their facilities, right? Colorado.
Stephanie, sorry, you mean quality of experience, like in their just experience and where they're living and their relationships, and is that what you're saying with the quality?
I think it's twofold. I think it is the experience of the person, right, and their expression of that experience, but it's also about capturing the qualitative experience of the treatment program itself. So, for example, when we talk about quality control standards, Florida is the one state in the nation that has actually created these, believe it or not. There's no other state that's done this. And essentially what they do, for example, is they say, a measurement of good quality care would be that there are parent or community engagement in the child's treatment. If you do that, that is a good thing, right? You've checked that is a quality experience for a person, or, and so my point is that is qualitative data as well. And it's important to capture, I think, all of that, right? Because if we don't engage kids, if we don't have their parents take part of treatment, and that is a best practice, that is a quality control measurement, that is an important thing to know, right? But so it's not just interviewing individuals, it's also about creating real standards by which we can measure good quality treatment, because good quality treatment means engagement, which in turn means kids stay, presumably. So I just wanted to broaden our definition of quality or qualitative data. That's my point. I'm sorry, that took way too long.
No. Thank you. I appreciate that. Brandon, I saw you raise your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment on that. I absolutely 100% agree that we're too heavy on compliance and not quality in our controls around things, which we can make a huge advancement. I also believe, though, quality is a broad loaded term, and a meaning, like we have to be specific to what that means, quality, because oftentimes we get into likes and dislikes versus measurable growth and what is happening through the program. And I often bring it back to my example of my own kids, like school. Like if you ask them if they like school, they would say absolutely not. And if that's the measurement, then that's problematic. But if they are making progress in learning, and even though it might be uncomfortable, then that is what the desire is and the objective is. And I think those things get real blended when and confusing for people when we start looking at quality.
Yeah, Brandon, I appreciate you making that point too, because I would imagine from your perspective, you see that a lot, where the difference in the way that you frame the question and also the way that you measure that progress. So appreciate you naming that kind of differentiation from your experience. Renee, I'm seeing your hand raised, and then also Renee, I'd love to hear from your group too. So I'm imagining you have a comment based on this conversation, and then also I'll pivot to sharing out what you all shared in your breakout.
Yeah, I also wanted to say, I completely agree that it would be excellent to have more focus on quality and rather than just compliance, and I do think that could really improve the outcomes for a lot of kids in a lot of ways. I think there's other things that need to happen though also for this runaway issue. And, I'm just also sensitive to a lot of the providers who often feel like they are blamed that if only they did things better, kids wouldn't run. Whereas I think it is important to note that for all the reasons described in the report we're looking at today, I think no matter how high of the quality is, there's going to need to be other solutions. So I guess I sort of say like, yes, and like I totally agree on the quality piece, but we also, I think we'll need to do other things to help keep certain kids safe.
Totally appreciate you naming that, Renee. I think that's the out loud wrestling we're hoping to hear from you all, because that's what we want to capture of like, here are the points made, but also here are the yes ands. So appreciate you making that point. Renee, also just going to throw it back to you and your group. I didn't know if there was someone that wanted to share from your group. Just overall, we've just got a couple minutes, but would love to hear from you. What was the theme, and what were you all kind of coalescing around in your conversation?
I'll turn it over to Jenna if I can. Is that okay, Jenna, since you were taking minutes?
Yeah. So I think that we all agree too that the report was helpful, but probably not going to be helpful to just continue to repeat that information. And I think a lot of the same things that the other group had said. I think a couple pieces that we just noted to take into account too is making sure that we have free flowing information, which I think was important to talk about, and making sure that there's not blame being put on facilities and or parents, right? And I think that goes back to kind of the quality of treatment. Sometimes when you have those black and white standards, and if they're not hit, then it's like, oh, they're not doing a good job, and that's not the case. So we talked a little bit about that, and just again getting to those patterns and behaviors that are happening more on kind of those individual basis. And so I like the idea of surveys and pieces like that. And then another interesting point that was brought up was, just discussion around physical boundaries. And we had to ask some clarification in our group, but like actual physical boundaries or, ways to track kids if they are a consistent runner, if they have IDD or something like that, and they might not fully understand, the reasons that they're running, and just kind of those safety pieces. I think our group too was, as I think a lot of us are, just really antsy to get to some more solution-based pieces, wanting to be data informed, because we all know that that's really important, but then what are those next steps to really start looking at those next solutions?
Appreciate that, Jenna. Anybody else from the group want to add, or how did Jenna do? We good? Okay, cool. Thanks, Jenna. Appreciate that. I also, real quick before I close this out, I put in the chat, but if there are members of the public that want to provide public comment, please just drop me a quick note as we close things out to ensure that there's time. And Steve, I'm seeing you. Are you wanting to give a public comment? Okay. All right, cool. So give me just a minute. We'll close out, and then we'll end with the public comment. I want to take a quick pulse check on kind of how I'm Doris and I were chatting and around how we're seeing the path forward. So, as we laid out the roadmap and where we are versus where we're going, we want to make really clear when we see transition points to directives. So from our perspective with the conversation today, we took the poll on answering the directive as it's written around qualitative data. We also dug in around recommendations and suggestions from this group and what it might look like to make any sort of suggestions in this report of what you all are wrestling with, of what qualitative data collection would look like moving forward. And it feels like a natural turning point to move away from the data conversation into the next directive in the next meeting. So I just want to make sure that we're reading that right from the group, and that I want to give you all an opportunity to respond if you feel like that's not where we are as a group, but that seems to be the sentiment, which is, Jenna, you kind of actually gave us a natural transition, which is we appreciate this conversation. We understand the why we're having this conversation, and we're ready to move on. So would anyone come off and share if you disagree with that, or just anything that you want to make sure that we're noting as we make a pivot into the next after this meeting? I would love to see if folks are in agreement with that as we close out this qualitative and quantitative data discussion. I'd love to see some, just, I'm not looking for a formal poll, but head nods. It looks like we're in alignment there. Okay, we're ready. Sounds like, so again, processes. Yeah, Ashley's like, yes. We know that some of this can feel flat to the process of where there is momentum around, and we appreciate you all allowing us to do the due diligence on what we are tasked to do, and also ensuring that we take the right path to the points that you all are eager to get to. So really just appreciate your patience and your due diligence on that. So we will consider the qualitative and quantitative data directives answered to the best of our ability with the report in mind, and then with the next meeting we'll continue on the path that we laid out earlier in the meeting. With that, I'm going to invite Steve. We've got 3 minutes for public comment. If you need more time, just totally understand. So let us know. But Steve, appreciate you always being here. And as Stephanie said, you all have been talking for years. So appreciate your ongoing presence with the task force, and welcome your comments now.
Thank you. I just want to confirm you can hear me. All good. Okay, thanks. Just for maybe people that don't know who I am, they're scratching their heads at the Zoom identifier. I'm a civil engineer. I'm not in the child welfare system at all. My day job is that, and but I'm also a board member of the Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health of Colorado. And reason I'm interested in this task force is because I've lived across the street from the Tennyson Center since 1995, and I've seen hundreds of runs and rescues. I'm hoping the task force is not losing sight of the urgency of the plight of the child that has run. By the time Timmy and others were placed in a facility, we can be sure that data collection, studies, and efforts to understand why kids run away had been undertaken for decades, maybe. Thankfully, this task force is perhaps different and maybe even nationally unique because it gets more perspectives at the same table at the same time. So that's hopeful, but let's not confuse more data collection, reporting, and studies for the immediate protection of kids who are and will be unpredictable and uncontrollable. Excellent new studies, rules, or statutes won't change that. Let me key in on a phrase I saw in an earlier slide, and it was a part of a bullet. It just said responsible for the care of children. Very that's the ultimate, right? That we're all trying to achieve for. Well, we know that ultimately that would be the parents, guardians, and those acting in loco parentis. Facilities have highly prescribed responsibilities in the rule book, but as we know, the rule book is practically silent. I searched for the keyword runaway or left campus or any of those variants. I think I got one search result back. So it's practically silent on responsibility for a child that has left the facility. And the facility does not act in loco parentis. I'd propose that increasing the responsibility of the facilities may help reduce runaways. I don't know if that's on anyone's agenda for these meetings. Currently, facilities are not responsible for a child off campus and experience no legal risk, really, or practical consequence. So a parent sends their child to a facility, but the facility can't keep the child at the facility. So the parent, who is not present or in control of really anything, is still responsible for the child's safety or acts. Rhetorical question, I guess. Perhaps then a facility should be obligated to keep the child safe and on campus and experience consequences if they can't. A parent may need a facility precisely because their child runs away from home and can't keep them from running away. They need a facility because it is ostensibly a safer environment for the child, but we've created a system where the facility alternative is surprisingly less safe. So as a society, I think we regard free will and agency very, very, very highly. But should we do that to the exclusion of keeping behaviorally and mental health challenged minors safe? Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate your time and thought and care for this topic. And I'll just put it in, I'll just put a pin that as this group moves more into that second quarter of prevention work, I can see where it'll be really important to keep your comments top of mind. So appreciate your continued engagement as we move along in this process. So thanks for being here. Anyone from the task force, any remaining comments before I kind of close this out? We're right on time, so I do appreciate a tightly facilitated agenda. Anyone else want to jump in before we conclude today's conversation? Okay. Well, again, appreciate you all being here, you all diving in, even when we're eager to be in sometimes different spaces and different conversations. I feel really good about the conversation we had today. I really appreciate you all's engagement around the report. We will, again, you'll see in the recap document how we are summarizing the way that you all are talking about this conversation in the way that we're moving on to the to and through this directive around qualitative data. And then the next meeting we have, I believe, is June 14th, and we will be on to the next. And so appreciate you'll see an email from us between now and then with that recap and any sort of materials to be ready for that June meeting. And if you need anything between now and then, or you would like to have any sort of one-on-ones with our facilitation team or with Stephanie and Beth as chair and co-chair, please, of course, just reach out to us, and we welcome the opportunity. With that, I'm going to drop in, Stephanie, if you want to, any closing remarks from you, and I'm going to drop in the exit survey while you're closing out.
Yeah, just know, thank you. As always, it's a pleasure to talk to all of you and learn from all of you. I did want to do one little shout out before I go, and that is to thank our friend Alexis. Those are the best meeting minutes I think I've ever seen as a person, period. So just thank you. Alexis is part of Keystone's team, and really just so well written and so thoughtful, and just captured so many nuances of our conversations. And really these meetings would not be robust without having a record of really what's being said by all the various members. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be a part of this team, be able to have the honor to write down all of the wonderful responses that are given in this forum. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Stephanie. And yes, Alexis is on a number of projects with me, and we are always very lucky because she captures the things that I would just gloss right over. So appreciate that. All right. Well, I've dropped the exit survey in the chat. Again, we appreciate all your time. And we will see you back in June. And we'll talk to you soon. Thanks again, all.